Well, it's a sign of any good conference that there's an embarrassment of riches. There's been an embarrassment of riches in terms of a rich conversation and a kind of surplus of things to talk about. So, unfortunately, it's getting late. We've been running late, and we just have a brief set of closing remarks by the principal of King's College, Sir Rick Traynor.
Well, you may well wonder, how am I going to address, as the program says I should, lessons for the future of cities and universities when I miss virtually all of the conference? Well, I'm wondering that too, actually. But it certainly has been a profound disadvantage to miss most of the papers, though what I've heard I've certainly liked and been stimulated by a lot. Fortunately, when I was out of the room for most of the day, I was listening to two other conferences, which I had the pleasure of opening also. One of them about Europe, European Union type issues, and the other one about banks, both of which are rather relevant to things that have been discussed here. So I don't feel I'd be totally deprived, but I do wish that I've been able to hear everything in the conference. Well, the future of cities and universities. I suppose one thing I should say is that the two of them are linked, I think. It's a sort of commonplace, a truism of the history of universities, which I've spent a little time and effort, and especially the urban history of universities, that the two are linked. Now, of course, it's possible to have a great university in a sort of puny urban place, and equally you can have a great city with not many great universities. But in general, there is a kind of symbiosis between the two. And it seems to follow that with all these amazing issues that you've been exploring today, that universities have a significant role in making further progress in dealing with them. But one of the interesting things about this conference, I think, is that not everybody is here waving a university banner. And maybe part of the key to the next stage of the relationship between universities and urban progress, just to give it a term, is that perhaps the people concerned with cities who work at universities need to keep collaborating more with other types of organizations, firms, think tanks, governments, and so on. I had one other reflection. This is me as a historian, urban historian. I don't know how much you talked about the past during the day. Not very much while I've been here, but that may not be a good guide to it. But just being a little whimsical, and just imagine, suppose that a conference like this had been held in the 1840s, with what passed for futurology in the mid-19th century. What would people have been speculating about? What would their list of, obviously that list would be very different because some of those terms hadn't even been invented. But it struck me that they could have come up with quite an ominous list of problems, really, couldn't they? You know, one thinks of the sheer problems, the rapid acceleration of population, especially urban population that was underway, huge shifts of people between countries and within countries, the terrible problems of urban health and alleged immiseration and so on and so forth. And yet, and I don't want to sound Panglossian, but a lot of those problems were, I mean, some people lost out in the process, many millions, tens of millions of people, of course, but a lot of those problems were sorted out between the 1840s and, say, the early 20th century. So that reflection, for what it's worth, made me sympathetic to what I take to be the general kind of optimistic set of assumptions of this conference, that a group of experts sitting around in a concentrated way can come up with useful perspectives that they might then, by acting in these various ways, be able to produce some sort of benefit for the future. But then the pessimistic side of me took hold, and I said, well, what went wrong in the interim between the sorting out of these problems in the by the early 20th century, on my reading, and the present? Well, I suppose there's one big word: war. The catastrophe of the 20th century, of 20th century urban dwellers, more than anything else, was war, wasn't it? Not just people in urban areas lost their lives, that's for sure, or have been ruined in various ways, but gigantic numbers of people in cities were killed in the 20th century by conflicts between the states. That was the worm in the apple. So this led me to wonder, well, what's the worm in the apple of the 21st century? Well, my colleague Chris talked about distributional issues and referred to the sweep of unrest across North Africa and so on. But clearly that's one danger. But while I've been here anyway, you haven't talked much about climate change or about alleged overpopulation. I read an article the other day which said that overpopulation was nothing to worry about. It was an entirely simplistic way of looking at the problems of the world, and that the genius of the human species was that we had willfully ignored overpopulation since the dawn of civilization, and that we would find ways to cope with overpopulation in the future. That's what we did. We came up with solutions to that sort of problem. I must say, I'm not sure I believe that at all. Surely there is some good evidence to suggest that the globe is nearing really dangerous levels of population in terms of pressure on resources and environmental damage. And also, it interacts with the issue of war and distributional battles. But however that works out, we seem to have a gigantic problem of climate change on our hands, which we're at a sort of pause at the moment. Nobody seems to think that pause, it may lower the longer-term estimates of increase in temperature, but it's certainly not going to eliminate the long-term rise. In some ways, that must be the greatest urban problem, especially given what a high percentage of the urban population of the world lives in coastal cities. So, having listened to the bit of the conference I've listened to, I'm optimistic just because of how stimulating and penetrating all that is. But if we're to replicate the success of my hypothetical urban conference, urban futurology conference in the 1840s, I suspect we may need a bit more of that in future discussions of this kind. But I'm really encouraged by what I've heard. Having had a very small role in the genesis of this conference, as I explained at the beginning, I'm absolutely delighted with the result. I think this has been a real intellectual tour de force with lots of interesting practical implications. I'm very glad indeed that it happened at King's, and I very much hope that it will be followed up, that there will be sequels. I hope they'll all happen at King's. But wherever they happen, I hope there will be sequels, because it seems to be a really powerful intellectual recipe that you all have concocted. So thanks for coming, and I hope there's something more to come back to.